A silvery flash of ancestral power surged through the earth like a lightning bolt, as Isabella held firm to the reins of Shadowfax. Shadowfax's eyes now shone with the wisdom of 1,000 generations, and the spectral chains binding the equine souls dissolved into luminous dust under the transformative power of a pure heart that dared to see beauty where others saw only neglect, but to understand how a 12-year-old girl came to break ancient curses and free captive spirits. We must return to that chilly autumn morning when it all began with a simple visit to the Stoneville Horse Fair. It was an ordinary Saturday when Isabella awoke before sunrise, her brown eyes shining with the expectation only children can maintain in the face of life's small adventures. She had saved every coin for 6 months, hoarding the change from unbought candy, unread magazines, and small luxuries she'd forgone with the quiet discipline of one who dreams big. Her mother, Elena, a woman whose hands were calloused from years of work at the town laundry, watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and worry. "Are you sure you want to spend all your savings on a horse, my dear?" Elena asked, adjusting the woolen scarf around the girl's neck. "Horses are a lot of work and we already have so many responsibilities." Isabella nodded resolutely, her brown hair dancing in the morning breeze. "I know, Mom, but I feel like I need to do this. It's like something is calling me there." The bus ride to Stoneville took 40 minutes, traversing golden fields where autumn had painted its signature in shades of amber and crimson. Isabella pressed her face against the fogged window, watching the landscapes unfold like pages from an illustrated book. Her friends, Carla and Beatrice, chattered about the horses they hoped to find, describing majestic animals with silky manes and proud bearing. "I bet I'll pick an Arabian thoroughbred," Carla declared, smoothing her blonde hair. "My dad said he'll chip in if I choose wisely." Beatrice laughed, swinging her legs in the seat. "I want one that's gentle but elegant, something that looks like it came out of a fairy tale." Isabella smiled, but remained silent. Her dreams were simpler and at the same time more profound. She wasn't seeking elegance or pedigree. She sought connection, that inexplicable spark that arises when two souls recognize each other across species. The Stoneville Horse Fair was a spectacle of colors, sounds, and aromas. Dozens of gleaming animals were displayed in stalls decorated with colorful ribbons and gold-plated signs listing impressive lineages. Men in leather hats and polished boots circulated among the buyers, their voices echoing promises of speed, endurance, and beauty. That night, Isabella couldn't sleep. The letter remained on her desk, the words dancing in her mind like incandescent embers. Luminaris, that was Shadowfax's real name, and now everything began to make sense. The way the Mare had looked at her at the fair, the instant connection they felt, the feeling that that meeting was destined to happen. At dawn, unable to resist her curiosity, Isabella put on her warmest coat and quietly left the house. The moon was almost full, only a day or two away from completing its cycle. She walked through the familiar grounds, but this time with different eyes, searching for something that might always have been there, just waiting to be discovered. It was behind the barn, in an area partly covered by wild vines, that she found it. Between two old trees, almost completely hidden by vegetation, was a black iron gate. The bars were ornamented with intricate designs that seemed to move in the moonlight, creating shadows that danced hypnotically. How had she never noticed it before? The gate looked ancient, much older than any other structure on the property. Isabella approached reverently, reaching out to touch the cold metal. The moment her fingers made contact with the bars, an electric sensation ran up her arm, and she could swear she heard a distant whisper, like voices carried by the wind. The gate was locked, but not with any ordinary lock. Instead, there was a metal plate with engraved symbols, the same symbols she had vaguely seen on Shadowfax's saddle, but now glowing with a soft, silvery light. Isabella ran back to the house, grabbed the letter, and returned to the gate. In the moonlight, the words on the paper seemed clearer, and she noticed details she had missed before. At the end of the letter, there was a sequence of symbols identical to those on the gate. With trembling hands, she began to trace the symbols in the air, following the order indicated in the letter. At first, nothing happened, but then, slowly, the metal began to warm under her fingers, and the symbols on the gate began to glow more intensely. A soft click echoed in the stillness of the night. The gate was open. When a pure heart guides the mare through the forgotten path, she read aloud, the words flowing naturally from her lips. The veil between this world and the shadow realm will thin. Prepare to confront what has grown in the darkness and rescue her from a fate sealed by the chains of fear. As she spoke, more symbols appeared, telling a story that unfurled like an ancestral scroll. Isabella saw images from distant eras, when horses like Shadowfax served as guardians between worlds, protecting the boundary between physical reality and spiritual realms. She saw how, over the centuries, these special creatures had been hunted, captured, and imprisoned by those who sought to use their power for dark purposes. Shadowfax, Luminaris, was one of the last of her lineage, and had been held captive for decades, her life force slowly draining until someone with a pure heart could find and free her. The stories you've been following here are just the beginning of a journey of fascinating discoveries about hidden worlds. If you wish to continue exploring these extraordinary narratives, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming episodes that will reveal even more mysteries like this one. The truth was both beautiful and terrifying. For generations, shadow merchants, beings that existed on the border between the physical and spiritual, had hunted and imprisoned the ancestral mares, using them as anchors to keep portals open between worlds. These portals allowed shadowy entities to influence the physical world, feeding on human fear, despair, and greed. But there was an ancient prophecy that spoke of a pure-hearted child who would find the last of the guardian mares and free her, restoring the balance between the worlds, and forever closing the portals that allowed this nefarious influence. Isabella looked at Shadowfax, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had committed to do. It wasn't just about caring for an abused animal, it was about breaking chains that had imprisoned not only a mare, but an entire spiritual ecosystem. "What do I need to do?" she asked, and her voice echoed in the clearing with an authority she didn't know she possessed. The images in the symbols shifted, showing her a ritual that should be performed on the night of the full moon. The very next night, she was to lead Shadowfax through a series of smaller portals, each guarded by spirits that would test her courage, compassion, and determination. If she could pass all the tests, she would reach the main portal, where the chains imprisoning not only Shadowfax, but all the mares of her lineage, could finally be broken. But the process wouldn't be without risk. The shadow merchants would realize what was happening, and send their forces to stop her. They couldn't physically harm her. The laws governing their existence prevented them from directly harming a pure-hearted child, but they could try to confuse her, terrorize her, or make her give up through fear. Isabella spent the next day in preparation, though she didn't know exactly how to prepare for something so beyond her normal comprehension. She cared for Shadowfax with even more affection, talking to her about what was to come, and had the feeling that the mare understood every word. Elena noticed the change in her daughter's behavior, a newfound seriousness, a maturity that seemed to have sprung from nowhere. But when she asked if everything was all right, Isabella just smiled and said she was ready for a great adventure. When the sun set and the full moon emerged majestically in the starry sky, Isabella donned her warmest wool cloak and her most sturdy leather boots. She led Shadowfax to the secret gate, and this time, when they passed through it, the world on the other side was completely different. It was as if they had entered an ethereal version of their own reality. The trees were the same, but translucent, glowing with inner light. The air was denser, charged with energy that made Isabella's hair stand on end, and there were sounds, distant whispers, echoes of ancient voices, melodies that seemed to come from the stars themselves. The first portal appeared after a few minutes' walk. It was an archway of bluish light, guarded by an ethereal figure that slowly materialized as they approached. It was an elderly woman, with silver hair that floated as if submerged in water, and eyes that held the wisdom of millennia. "Pure-hearted child," the guardian said, her voice echoing like distant bells, "you seek to break ancestral chains, but tell me, why do you care about the fate of a mare you found by chance?" Isabella paused, considering the question. It would be easy to give a superficial answer about kindness or compassion, but she knew the guardian was seeking something deeper. It wasn't by chance, she said finally. When I saw her at the fair, thin and abandoned, I saw myself. I saw all the times I felt invisible, ignored, as if I had no value because I wasn't pretty or rich like the other children. But I also saw something more. I saw dignity. I saw a soul that refused to give up, even when everything seemed lost. I want to free Shadowfax because I know everyone deserves a chance to shine with their own light. The guardian smiled, and her form began to dissolve like morning mist. Compassion born of personal experience is the purest of motivations. Pass. The second portal was further ahead, guarded by a young man whose eyes burned like embers. His presence radiated challenge and doubt. "You're just a child," he declared. "How can you be sure your actions won't cause more harm than good? How do you know you're not being manipulated by forces you don't understand?" This question struck Isabella more deeply than the first. It was true, she didn't fully understand what she was doing, but when she looked at Shadowfax, she saw in the mare's eyes an absolute trust, a faith that transcended the need for complete understanding. "I'm not sure of anything," she admitted. "But I am sure of one thing: true love always chooses freedom over control, hope over fear. If I'm wrong, I'd rather be wrong trying to liberate someone than be right keeping someone imprisoned." The guardian nodded slowly, humility combined with moral courage. Pass. The third portal was the most difficult. It was guarded not by a figure, but by a presence that manifested as a vortex of whispering shadows. The shadows showed Isabella visions of what could happen if she failed. Shadowfax remaining imprisoned forever, other mystical animals being captured and enslaved, the world slowly being dominated by forces that fed on human despair. "See the weight of the responsibility you carry," the shadows whispered. "See the consequences of your possible failure. Wouldn't it be safer to give up now, before it's too late?" Isabella felt her legs weaken under the weight of the visions. It was too much for a 12-year-old girl to bear. But then Shadowfax approached and gently nuzzled her shoulder. And Isabella remembered something her grandmother used to say: "Courage isn't the absence of fear, my dear. It's doing what's right despite the fear." "I see the consequences," she said to the shadows, her voice gaining strength with each word. "But I also see the consequences of not trying. If I fail, at least I will have failed doing what I believe is right. That's better than succeeding by doing what I know is wrong." The shadows dissipated like smoke, revealing the final portal. On the other side was the stone arena she had seen in the visions, an ancient circle where spectral chains held captive not only Shadowfax, but dozens of other ancestral Mare. Their spirits were trapped there, their life forces slowly drained by shadowy entities that fed on their purity. In the center of the arena, materialized in its most terrifying form, was the force that had orchestrated this entire imprisonment. Not a physical creature, but a concentration of all the darkest human emotions: greed, hatred, fear, despair. It took the form of a storm of shadows with red eyes that burned like hot coals. So echoed a voice that seemed to come from 1,000 different throats: "The little savior has finally arrived. Do you really believe you can undo centuries of careful work?" Isabella looked around the arena, seeing the imprisoned spirits of the ancestral Mare. Some had been there so long they were little more than shadows of themselves. Others, like Shadowfax, still retained vestiges of their original strength. All looked at her with a mixture of desperate hope and melancholic resignation. "I don't need to undo your centuries of work," Isabella replied, surprised by the calmness in her own voice. "I only need to do what you never could: to love without wanting to possess, to care without wanting to control, to protect without wanting to dominate." The shadow storm roared in anger, expanding to fill the entire arena. "Love? You speak of love. Love is weakness. Love is illusion. Only power is real. Only control endures." "If power were everything," Isabella said, walking slowly toward the center of the arena, "you wouldn't need to keep these mares imprisoned. you wouldn't be afraid of a 12-year-old girl. She stopped beside Shadowfax and placed her hand on her neck. Love isn't weakness. Love is the force that moves the stars, that makes flowers grow through concrete, that transforms hardened hearts into fountains of compassion. As she spoke, a soft light began to emanate from her hand, spreading through Shadowfax's body. The mare lifted her head, and her eyes blazed with an ancient bluish light. The spectral chains that bound her began to crack like ice under the spring sun. "No!" screamed the shadow storm, attempting to coalesce around Isabella, but the light emanating from her grew stronger with each second, fueled not by power, but by something far deeper, the genuine love of a child who had seen suffering and chosen to alleviate it. One by one the chains imprisoning the ancestral mares began to break. As each one was freed, it joined Shadowfax, and the light grew even more intense. Soon, dozens of spectral mares were galloping around the arena, their forms becoming more solid and radiant with each passing moment. The shadow storm began to shrink, its forms dissolving like mist before the dawn. This isn't possible," she murmured. "Power always wins, strength always conquers." "You're right about one thing," said Isabella, now surrounded by ancestral mares that shimmered like living stars. "Strength always conquers, but you confused strength with violence, power with domination. True strength is the ability to choose love when it would be easier to choose hate. True power is the ability to liberate instead of imprison." With a final groan of defeat, the shadow storm dissolved completely, carried away by the wind like ashes from an extinguished fire. The remaining chains crumbled into luminescent dust, and the stone arena began to transform, the dark stones giving way to a verdant meadow bathed in the silvery light of the moon. The ancestral mares, now completely free, galloped in joyous circles around Isabella and Shadowfax. One by one, they approached the girl, gently touching her with their muzzles in a gesture of profound gratitude, before vanishing in rays of light that ascended towards the stars. Shadowfax was the last to leave. She approached Isabella and looked deeply into her eyes, and the girl could see in them not only gratitude, but also a kind of passing of responsibility. "You'll keep taking care of them, won't you?" Isabella asked, although she knew Shadowfax couldn't answer with words. But the mare tilted her head in a way that was clearly an affirmation. Then she too began to dissolve into light, but unlike the others, part of that light remained, condensing into a small crystalline stone that fell gently into Isabella's hands. The girl found herself back in the clearing behind her house, but now she knew that the portal would always remain there, invisible to ordinary eyes, but accessible whenever it was necessary to protect other mystical creatures that might need help. The crystal in her hands pulsed with a soft, warm light. Somehow, she knew it was a fragment of Shadowfax's essence, a permanent memory of the mare who had changed her life forever. More than that, it was a symbol of her new responsibility as guardian of the border between worlds. When Isabella returned home, she found her mother waiting in the kitchen with a cup of hot tea and a knowing smile. "How was your adventure, my dear?" Elena asked, as if she knew exactly what had happened. Isabella looked at her in surprise. "Mom, you knew?" Elena laughed softly, stroking her daughter's hair. "My grandmother told me stories about the guardian mares when I was little. She said that one day, when I grew up, I might meet one of them. But I think they were waiting for you, not me. Why didn't you ever tell me about this?" "Because some discoveries need to be made on one's own, at the right time by the right person." Elena kissed her daughter's forehead. "Besides, I wasn't sure if the stories were true, until you brought Shadowfax home, and I saw how the two of you connected." Isabella showed the crystal to her mother, who held it with reverence. "It's beautiful," Elena murmured, "and I can feel kindness in it. Peace. It's a piece of Shadowfax," Isabella explained, "so I'll never forget what I learned." "And what did you learn?" Isabella thought for a moment, organizing her thoughts about everything she had experienced. I learned that sometimes the most important things are the ones that seem least valuable at first glance. I learned that true courage isn't the absence of fear, but doing what's right even when you're afraid. And I learned that love has a power that goes far beyond what we can imagine. Elena nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Your grandmother would be very proud of you. In the days that followed, Isabella's life resumed an appearance of normalcy, but she knew that nothing would really be the same. The stable in the barn remained empty, but she could feel Shadowfax's comforting presence whenever she passed by, and whenever she looked at the crystal, which she now wore on a cord around her neck, she could hear the distant echo of hooves galloping free. At school, her classmates asked about what had happened to her horse. Isabella simply said that Shadowfax had found a better place to live, which was, in a way, the purest truth possible. Carla and Beatrice noticed a change in their friend. There was a new serenity in Isabella, a quiet confidence that hadn't existed before. When other students made unkind comments about her simple clothes or her modest savings, she simply smiled and moved on, as if she knew something they didn't know, and she did. She knew that a person's true worth wasn't in their outward appearance or material possessions, but in the ability to see beauty where others saw only imperfection, to offer love where others offered indifference. A few weeks later, Isabella was walking through town when she saw a familiar scene in front of the pet shop. There was a cage with an old lame dog that no one wanted to adopt. His fur was gray, his ears drooped sadly, and his eyes held the same expression of wounded dignity that she had seen in Shadowfax. Without hesitation, she entered the store. "How much for that dog?" she asked the attendant. The young man looked surprised. "That old mutt? Look, to be honest, we were thinking about, well, nobody's wanted him for months." "I want him," Isabella said simply. "How much?" "You can have him for free," said the attendant, clearly relieved. "You're doing us a favor." Isabella knew she was doing a favor for someone far more important than the pet shop. When she carried the dog home, a mixed-breed mutt she decided to name Courage, she could feel the Shadowfax crystal warming against her chest, approving her choice. Elena greeted the new member of the family with the same resigned and loving smile she had given Shadowfax. "I suppose our home is becoming a refuge for wounded souls," she said, but her words carried pride, not complaint. "That's what homes are for," Isabella replied, stroking Courage, who had already settled into her arms as if he'd always belonged there. "To be places where everyone is welcome, especially those who need it most." Over the months, other creatures found their way to the small farm. A three-legged cat Isabella found abandoned by the roadside, a family of orphaned rabbits that needed care until they were big enough to survive on their own. Each new rescue brought its own lesson, its own opportunity for growth. The local community began to notice. Neighbors who barely knew Isabella and Elena started showing up, sometimes bringing injured animals, sometimes just offering help. The modest farm became known as a place of healing and second chances. Mr. Jones, the man who had sold Shadowfax to Isabella, showed up one day with tears in his eyes and a young foal in his arms. "I found this little one abandoned by the road," he said. "His mother died in childbirth, and the owner didn't want to bother with special care. I thought, maybe you'd know what to do." Isabella received the foal, a small frail male with large frightened eyes, and immediately felt the familiar connection. "How did you know I would take care of him?" Mr. Jones smiled. "After you took Shadowfax, I started paying attention. I saw how you cared for her, heard about all the other animals that found their way here. Well, sometimes at the fair, I swear I see a beautiful mare galloping through the fields at night, a mare that looks exactly like Shadowfax would if she were healthy and free." Isabella smiled, touching the crystal beneath her shirt. "Maybe she's still around, just in a different form." The foal, whom she named Hope, became her most challenging project yet.
He needed feeding every 2 hours, constant medical care, and most importantly, the kind of patient love that teaches a frightened creature to trust again. But Isabella had learned that patient love was her specialty. During the long nights caring for Hope, she sometimes felt she wasn't alone. There was a comforting presence in the stable, a warmth that didn't come from any physical source. On more than one occasion, she woke to find the foal sleeping peacefully, as if someone had been there tending to him while she rested. As Hope grew stronger, Isabella realized he had something special, not the mystical powers of Shadowfax, but a natural gentleness that attracted other injured animals. It was as if he could sense their pain and offer comfort simply by being present. "He's going to be a healer," Elena said one afternoon, watching Hope interact with an injured bird they had found, not in a magical sense, but in a deeper one. "He'll teach others about compassion." Isabella nodded, understanding that each animal she'd rescued had brought not only the opportunity to care, but also to learn. Courage had taught her about resilience, how to stay cheerful despite physical hardship. The three-legged cat, Tripod, had demonstrated adaptability, how to find new ways to do old things. And now Hope was showing her how suffering, when healed with love, could transform into a source of healing for others. On her 13th birthday, Isabella was in the pasture with Hope when she saw something that made her heart leap. On the horizon, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, was the unmistakable silhouette of a mare galloping freely. For a moment, just a moment, she could have sworn it was Shadowfax, not the weak, abused creature she had bought at the fair, but the magnificent luminaris she had discovered hidden beneath. The mare stopped at the top of a distant hill and looked toward Isabella. Even from a distance, her eyes seemed to gleam with that familiar bluish light. Then she reared, her mane flowing in the wind, before disappearing over the other side of the hill. "Did you see her too?" Elena asked, approaching. "I did," Isabella whispered. "She's truly free, isn't she?" "The best liberations are always permanent," Elena replied, "and the best lessons always stay with us." That night, Isabella sat in her room with the Shadowfax crystal in her hands, reflecting on everything that had happened since that cold autumn morning when she decided to buy a mare that no one else wanted. The shy girl, who had been touched by an inexplicable curiosity, had become a confident young woman who knew her mission in life was to care for those others had abandoned. But more than that, she had learned that each act of kindness creates ripples that spread far beyond what we can see. The animals she had saved had not only found loving homes, they had inspired others in the community to look with new eyes at abandoned and needy creatures. The farm had become a center of compassion, a place where people brought not only injured animals, but also their own hurting hearts. Elena had started serving tea and biscuits to visitors, and often Isabella found adults talking to her mother about their own struggles, finding in the stories of animal rescue the metaphors they needed for their own healing journeys. Dr. Evans, the local vet, had become a regular visitor, offering his services for free and training Isabella in basic animal care. "You have a gift," he said, one afternoon, watching her feed an orphaned fox kit. "It's not just technical knowledge, it's something deeper. Animals trust you instinctively." "I think it's because I understand what it's like to feel lost," Isabella replied. "And when you understand that, you naturally want to help others find their way." As night deepened, Isabella walked to the hidden gate behind the barn. It was still there, invisible to casual eyes, but softly glowing under the starlight. For those who knew how to look, she hadn't gone through it since the night she freed the ancestral mares, but she knew she could, if needed. Touching the crystal around her neck, she whispered, "Thank you, Shadowfax, for teaching me that we don't find our purpose when we stop searching for it. We find it when we start living according to our deepest values." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, carrying with it the distant, comforting sound of hooves galloping free. Isabella smiled, knowing that whenever a wounded creature found its way to her farm, whenever someone chose love over indifference, whenever a pure heart decided to see beauty where others saw only imperfection, the spirit of Shadowfax, and of all the ancestral mares, would continue to gallop, free and eternal, across the endless fields of possibility. The next morning, Isabella awoke to find a letter under her door. There was no return address, but the handwriting was familiar, similar to that of the old letter she'd found in Shadowfax's saddle. This one, however, was new, written on modern paper with fresh ink. Dear Guardian, the letter read, "Your work has not gone unnoticed. Across the world, other mystical creatures await hearts as pure as yours. When you are ready for your next adventure, you will know. Until then, continue doing what you do best, turning abandonment into love, despair into hope, and captivity into freedom. The world needs more people like you." Isabella carefully folded the letter and stored it with the original, knowing that one day, when the time was right, she would be called upon for another mission. But for now, she was exactly where she needed to be, at home, surrounded by creatures who had found a second chance at love, ready to offer the same opportunity to other wounded souls yet to arrive. And as the sun rose over the golden fields, painting the world in hues of renewed hope, hope whinnied softly in the pasture, courage bounded joyfully in the yard, and tripod stretched contentedly in the sun. Each of them carried within them a part of the lesson Shadowfax had taught, that true beauty lies not in outward perfection, but in the courage to love unconditionally, in the strength to choose compassion over indifference, and in the wisdom to recognize that sometimes the greatest adventures begin when we decide to see with our hearts instead of just our eyes.